Underwater quests are as old as gaming itself. World 202, the Labyrinth Zone, the Temple of Water. Splashing around and defeating your enemies is a part of any sensible hero's journey in the modern age. So, with that in mind, when's the last time you fought underwater in D&D? Or in Pathfinder, or in Dungeon World, or really any TTRPG? And look, it's not unheard of, but most DMs are a little bit apprehensive to run something underwater because the rules are either too restrictive or too nebulous to really run anything without that crushing fear of getting it wrong. How do your players breathe underwater? How do they fight? How does armor work? And how do arrows fly through the water? Now, there are a lot of fears surrounding running underwater, and I'm going to take you through and show you a little brief history of underwater mechanics and adventures in D&D and Pathfinder, and then together we're going to talk through how to run something like underwater combat in a simple way so you don't feel overwhelmed. A great way to ease you into your own undersea adventures. Howdy folks, my name is Sean and welcome back to Delver. This is Kraken Week, a massive collaboration with a bunch of other D&D YouTubers set up by Ginny D and Pointy Hat. All throughout the first week of July, you're going to see some of your favorite D&D YouTubers covering topics about the sea, high and low, so be on the watch out for any more sea dog content. The two fears that I hear the most often when discussing running undersea adventures is how do my players survive and how the hell does combat work? Getting your players to the undersea kingdom of the merfolk is actually going to be the easiest thing that you do, or in this case, the easiest thing that you don't do. If you're running in a system like D&D where players have access to spells like water walk and water breathing and control water, you as the DM really don't have to worry about them getting to where the quest is under the sea. Always remember that at your table there are 3 to 6 plus heads working on a single problem, and you will never, as the single DM, match the computing power of all of those people combined. That said, your players are most likely going to come up with incredible solutions to the problems you present to them, so it's up to them to figure out how to follow your plot hook to get under the sea. And all you have to do as a dungeon master is accept their good ideas and help them along, and if they make assumptions that are proven to be incorrect, stop them before it gets them killed. Trust in your players to find unique and creative ways to get to where the adventure is. And if they really do start to struggle, you can give them any number of solutions from the top of your mind, be it items that allow them to breathe underwater that they have to do a small quest to receive, or maybe there's just a new spell that the wizard has to learn to give them infinite water breathing. But so long as your players end up finding their way there, all you have to worry about is the hook that gets them there. The fishermen just keep pulling up dead meat riddled with spear marks. It looks like the merfolk kingdom is having some sort of civil war, and one side or the other is probably willing to pay handsomely for some divine intervention from the surface dwellers. The second concern I hear most often is how the hell does combat work? And to understand that, we need to look at some of the history as well as some of the supplements for D&D and Pathfinder to find the solution.
My name is Mark Seifter, and I am a game designer. I've worked on hundreds of different products for several companies. Many of them are for either Paizo, the creators of Pathfinder, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, or Roll for Combat, as also one of the 4 leads who created Pathfinder 2nd Edition.
And then you also worked on the Pathfinder campaign setting Aquatic Adventures. I think that released around like 2017, right?
Oh yes, 2017 is exactly correct. So at the time I was at Paizo as a staff member, and I was approached to work on Aquatic Adventures by the development lead, Adam Daigle. He said that he already had an author lined up to write some of like the world lore setting information at the beginning, Amber Scott, but wanted me to come on because there was a lot of aquatic rules and underwater rules in Pathfinder 1st Edition, many of which were inherited from D&D 3.5 and sometimes scattered in various places and not all together. and he wanted to make sure that for the most part, it gathered everything that had already been said about underwater adventures. Several of the pieces of information that I gathered for Aquatic Adventures absolutely existed in the rules up until that point. I like cited where it was from. But a lot of people were like, I didn't even know that was a rule. Is that really a rule? Has that been in there all along? Rules like the fact that you could become off balance underwater instead of being knocked prone. Just like you don't know which direction is up, and it was like a different like pseudo condition that was hiding on page 433 of the core rulebook.
The simple fact is this: when you commit to running an underwater adventure or an underwater campaign, you are going to be taking rules that will fundamentally change how you play the game. The biggest change, in my opinion, is going to be that moving into the third dimension. No longer will it be where on this two-dimensional battle map can I move to, it's going to be where in this 3D space up and low can I go to. And this was something that Mark and his team had to address for Aquatic Adventures.
I tried to provide advice for dealing with the 3 dimensions. Because normally you have to do with that only at higher levels when you have flying. But underwater from first level, you need to like be able to do a 3-dimensional combat, and there's certain things that you have to think about in that regard.
Adding a Z axis to a 2D battle map is tough work, and it's something that will require a lot of calculations when factoring in different combat scenarios. A lot of people err on the side of caution and mathematics, using the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, a triangle.
My group that I play with use the Pythagorean theorem, but not everyone wants to use the Pythagorean theorem.
However, if that is something that worries you, you don't want to have to do all that math during a session, I totally understand. Let me offer you a simpler solution. In my group, any vertical movement is also factored into any horizontal movement. What does that mean? Well,
for my games, I always just keep it to the grid. So if you want to go 10 feet forward and 15 feet up, that's 35 feet or 25 feet of movement. You have to move the horizontal and vertical direction. There's no like kind of, side C movement in my games.
Certainly, I would say that forcing them to take the legs of the triangle is way simpler. You could also do that with give them like a minor discount on the movement to be like, you have to take the legs of this triangle, but I'm going to give you a bespoke like 5 extra feet or something like that to try to counteract. And honestly, your way is a lot simpler and might work well for a lot of groups, because when you have to deal with all of the math, it can slow down the movement a lot. And if your campaign is always underwater, then that could happen every single time.
So now we have ways to get underwater, as well as ways to fight underwater. However, there are a few other extra changes that you can make to add a sense of displacement, of not belonging in this aquatic setting. Many of you probably don't know this, but I am a certified scuba diver, and I've been diving in the ocean since early high school. And no matter how many times I do open dives in the ocean, I am still out of place. I'm still a miss in that world. A foreigner in a strange land. A fish in water. And that's because I am. Humanoids were not meant to exist under the sea, and your game should reflect that in unique and creative ways. For example, changing how a spell interacts with the environment or even looks in the environment can go a long way in selling that.
I added a few other optional things that people could think about. For example, the visual lightning bolt that you see is based on combusted air, and it doesn't happen underwater. Lightning attacks would basically be invisible underwater, which would mean that you might be able to catch someone flat-footed, or like they wouldn't know that it was coming at them.
Adding complex rules to facilitate underwater combat does seem like a lot. Nobody wants to play in a game that they've been playing for years and still feel like they're getting it wrong. However, Mark makes a good point that these rules, even if you implement them, aren't going to address every situation that will come up. And it ultimately comes down to you, the Dungeon Master, to make the setting your own and make the rules reflect that.
Did you ever find that while going through and making these amendments, that you were like modifying the game to a degree that made it difficult for new players to play, or did you find that players were able to just easily jump into it?
It certainly is not the simplest underwater system. I would say Pathfinder 2 or 5e D&D are both a little bit more of a bare bones approach to make running underwater simpler, although they in exchange don't cover a lot of situations of weird nuance of things that might happen underwater.
So don't stress over it. If you want to run an underwater campaign where there's no three-dimensional combat, everybody just sinks to the ground, go for it. If you want to give your players infinite water breathing because they find a creature that subsists off of CO2 and it just breathes in what they're exhaling, that's awesome. Do it. Make your game your own and don't sweat the small things. You don't have to make sure that there is a rule for every situation. You can be, like water, a little fluid with it. A great example of this is Spelljammer, where the aesthetic is way more important than the mechanics that go into it. Although mechanics for Spelljammer would be great. Thank you all for watching, and a huge thank you to Mark for coming on and being interviewed to show us the process as well as the history of making undersea settings. I'll see you guys next time, and make sure to click on the playlist in the description below to see all of the other Kraken Week material that is being produced by the D&D community. Have a good day.